Hello and welcome back to Understanding the American Revolution. This is video number 8, and I thought I would actually do this live, not because I think there's so many people out there just hanging on my every word, but I am trying to get used to the live stream setting. It's a different way to present this, and of course, a different way to build up the course as I go through more videos. So this is originally recorded live, but most of you are probably going to see it recorded on the channel later. So we're on the Stamp Act, and this is really important. This is the key to how the revolution really gets started. Real beginning, I won't say the beginning of revolutionary sentiment, but this is really the spark that starts to ignite it. And this is in 1765. So the Stamp Act, really crucial in the history of the American Revolution. So the Stamp Act is a tax, of course, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to go through it. I don't have an electronic version of it to show you, but that's fine because it's just kind of, its effect is more important than the words of the act. So that's why this is a good one to do on live. So why did this happen? This was passed in March of 1765, and why did the British Parliament do this? Well, of course, Great Britain needed money. We talked about that in a previous video. Britain had just come out, this is 1765, 2 years earlier, they had just come out of the French and Indian War, but that's what it was called in the New World, 7 Years' War, that's what it was called in Europe. Hugely, ruinously expensive, and suddenly Britain has a gigantic debt built up as a result of this war, and they need a way to pay it off. But there's also more to it than that. So it's a way to raise money, but that's not the end of the story. The British cabinet at the end of the war decided that they needed to keep large numbers of troops, as many as 10,000 of them, stationed in the colonies. Now, why did they do that? Well, two reasons, really. Ostensibly, the reason was to guard the frontier against Native American attacks. Remember, we talked about Pontiac's Rebellion, which broke out in 1763, just right after the end of the French and Indian War, where the American Indians were trying to dislodge British power, which was spreading over the continent with France's defeat. So that was one reason. But there was another kind of more insidious reason why Britain wanted to have lots of troops there. The officer corps of the British Army really swelled during the war. Of course, that would happen. Building a large army, you're fighting war overseas. This was a world war, and they needed lots of officers. But now it's peacetime, and if you shrink the army, then you're going to put a lot of officers out of work. Nobody cares about the little peons, of course, except in the colonies where they got land. We talked about that last time as sort of a pension. But many of the British officers in the regular Army officer corps got their positions through patronage. So it wasn't because they were such great soldiers, but it was because they were politically well connected. So Parliament, especially the House of Lords, was not too keen on disbanding the army and demobilizing all the sons of their powerful friends. Of course, they wanted to keep them employed, and you weren't going to have a standing army in Britain. That would have been, first of all, what are they going to do? They're just going to go patrolling around London, doing what? It doesn't make any sense. And also the British people would not really react well to, hordes of redcoat armed troops swarming through their cities and little villages. So it was just a ridiculous idea. So, of course, they had to be stationed in the colonies. And we've got this Indian problem that we can use as an excuse to keep this officer corps mobilized and the army mobilized. But, of course, this is super, super expensive. Whenever you have large numbers of troops billeted overseas, you're going to have a lot of expenses. So Britain needed money, basically. So before we get to the Stamp Act, in 1764, they passed something called the Sugar Act. And this was actually an amendment to the Molasses Act of 1733, which had been on the books for a long time. That was a tax on molasses imported into the colonies. So remember I said in an earlier video that molasses is an important commodity. It was imported mostly illegally into the colonies because the tax from 1733 was so high. So, and ironically, the Sugar Act of 1764 actually lowered the tax on molasses. So shouldn't that be a good thing? Well, what they were trying to do, it came at the cost of increased enforcement, because Britain now wanted to really, really enforce this act and collect a duty. And they thought, well, if it's lower than, but they know we mean business, then people are going to be more apt to do this. Didn't work too well. Parliament and the administration of the new Prime Minister, George Grenville, who took office in 1763, still needed money. So the Stamp Act was passed on March 22nd, 1765, supposed to go into effect on November 1st. So this is a copy of the Stamp Act. Not gonna put it on the screen for you, but this is it's really interesting to read because it's so comprehensive. So every one of these lines, every one of these paragraphs is a new tax, a tax that hadn't existed before. So who does this tax fall on? Well, it falls on basically everybody. So let's look at who might be pissed off by this tax and why. So one of the people that's going to be really angry about this are attorneys. Every single instrument, every single in court or outside of court is going to be taxed, meaning it's got to have, and the way this worked is you have to have a stamp. You have to have a stamp on a piece of paper, and you have to pay for that stamp. So that's how this thing is going to work. So every single instrument in court or out of court is going to be taxed. Oh, and their clients are going to be taxed too. So you've got attorneys that are pissed off, and you've got their clients that are pissed off. So merchants, people with money, landowners, everybody is angry about this. Number 14, and I'll just read you, this is an example. I'm not going to read all these, but an example of how this tax works. Number 14, for every skin or piece of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which shall be engrossed, written, or printed any note or bill of lading, which shall be signed for any kind of goods, wares, or merchandise to be exported from, or any clearance granted within said colonies and plantations, a stamp duty of 4 pence. Okay, so sales of bills of lading. So if you're trading goods anywhere, if you're shipping goods anywhere, you can't move any goods without having the stamp on your bill, your transit documents. Okay, 1819. Number 18, number 19. For every skin or piece of vellum or parchment, blah, 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 engrossed, written, any license for retailing of spirituous liquors to be granted any person who shall take out the same. 20 shillings. 20 shillings. So tap keepers, if you can't have a liquor license or stock your bar without taxes. Now, this is going to be important because taverns are going to become a hotbed of revolutionary activity. The Sons of Liberty, which we're going to get into in a future video, they used to meet in taverns in urban areas, especially in New York City and in Boston. So you can see why this is going to be going to make them angry. Landowners, or anybody who does business in land. Okay, land was the chief source of wealth in the colonies. And so you add this to the outrage of the proclamation line, which I talked about in the previous video, and you've got an even more explosive situation. Anyone who employs anybody for any purpose. So basically all economic activity is subject to this tax. Newspapers, books, anything that's printed or read, playing cards, for God's sake. So why is this, newspapers, let's just take that. Why is that such a boneheaded move on the part of the British? Well, it's going to ensure that all the press of the colonies, every single newspaper, is going to be against this. Oh, and I should mention, I can't forget this, that the tax cannot be paid in paper money issued by the colonies themselves. Got to be paid in actual British currency, of which there is a huge shortage in the colonies. So big taxes, hard to pay them. They're on everything, hard to pay them. Don't have the money. You just don't have it. So what the hell were they thinking? I mean, what were the British thinking about? This is ludicrous. This is ludicrous. This just angered everybody. What were they thinking? Well, there was a precedent for this kind of this sort of thing. Stamp Acts had actually been used before in England to great effect. This act was mostly the brainchild of Lord Grenville, who was the prime minister, the new prime minister. And there's an interesting history here with colonial agents in London. The colonies did send representatives to London, although they couldn't vote. They were not seated in Parliament. So Grenville and his cronies claimed that they had given the colonies an ultimatum the year before in 1764 that either you raise the taxes yourselves, raise revenue yourselves, or we'll do it for you. However, this ultimatum seems to have been somewhat disingenuous. Clearly, it was not communicated to the colonial legislatures through their proper channels. So we don't really know how the communication went with the colonies. They certainly didn't get the message, and the British were trying to come up with ways to raise money. But this is the worst way to go about doing it. And it was just a really dumb move on the part of the British. And there was a lot of debate within Parliament, people warning the Prime Minister and the others in the cabinet saying, look, this is a bad idea. Everybody's going to rise against this thing. It's not worth it. Don't do it. But Grenville pushed ahead anyway. So Stamp Act, really, really important. And in the next video, we're going to get to some of the reactions to the Stamp Act, tars and feathers, for example, and a lot of other things that are going to start really ballooning the situation in the colonies, really bad and revolutionary situation. So that's the Stamp Act, key part of the revolutionary story. Thank you for watching, whether you watch this live or whether you're seeing it recorded after the fact. Thanks very much, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.